Labour minister torn apart by GMB's Susanna Reid as furious Starmer row erupts. Susanna Reid erupted at a guest on ITV's Good Morning Britain as they clashed over views on Keir Starmer. Good Morning Britain descended into chaos on Tuesday morning as host Susanna Reid engaged in a fiery row with Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson. The ITV star and her co-host Ed Balls challenged the minister on the latest comments from Sir Keir Starmer as he condemned pro-Palestine protests planned for today to mark the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks and has called them un-British. As Susanna asked the ITV show's guests about the comments, the pair shouted over each other as they had opposing views. In a fiery rant, the presenter asked, "Is it not possible to have compassion for the Jewish community and all that they have suffered, and also be entitled to exercise a legitimate and lawful right to protest what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza? Are you suggesting that protesting against Israel, in itself, is anti-Semitic?" Ms. Phillipson sternly replied, "No," before adding that the right to protest is a fundamental right which we all benefit from, and said that it is a cornerstone of our democracy. However, she then continued to say that just because you have the right to protest, does not mean that you should protest every day, especially on days like this. Susanna also asked what it is that makes the pro-Palestine protests un-British. Ms. Phillipson responded to say that our British values are respect for one another, and would urge people taking part in protests today to question whether or not they really need to do that today, of all days. She added, "Do you really have to do that today of all days? There are 364 other days in the year where you can protest." Susanna hit back saying that it is possible to do two things at the same time, as the pair began to shout over each other. Fans of the ITV show were fuming this morning as Keir Starmer's latest comments were discussed. The Prime Minister repeated his calls for a two-state solution, the release of the remaining hostages, and for more aid to be allowed into Gaza and, writing in the Times, also said that the UK is indifferent about anti-Semitism. But fans of GMB hit back at the PM's comments as they branded him out of touch. On X/Twitter, one fan wrote, "Starmer is so out of touch, so ineffective as a Prime Minister that it's embarrassing. Another 4 years of this and the country will be beyond salvation." Another fumed, "Is that the best Starmer can come out with? Un-British. What an absolute plonker of a Prime Minister. Ban the marches for God's sake or do something a bit more proactive than sitting on your hands." One more said, "If this is un-British, then so was every anti-apartheid, anti-war, and civil rights march we've ever had. Jog on," while someone else added, "It's not un-British to protest about genocide." Good Morning Britain descended into political chaos this morning as Labour's senior minister found himself utterly dismantled by co-host Susanna Reid in a fiery on-air clash over Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. The tension was palpable from the moment the minister appeared on screen, a composed smile hiding the unease of someone walking straight into a storm. It began innocently enough. The show opened with the usual bright graphics and brisk music, but viewers quickly realized they were in for something far more explosive than the typical breakfast banter. Susanna Reid, known for her measured tone and razor-sharp questions, didn't waste a second. With her notes stacked in front of her and a glint of disbelief in her eyes, she went straight for the jugular. "Minister," she began, leaning forward slightly, "Sir Keir Starmer has faced intense criticism this week, from within your own party, over his handling of the new tax proposal. How do you defend a leader who seems increasingly out of touch with both the public and his MPs?" The Labour minister, visibly flustered, tried to pivot to talking points. He mumbled something about long-term plans and rebuilding trust. But Susanna wasn't letting him off that easily. "Long-term plans?" she shot back, eyebrows raised. "The public can't even afford next month's bills. Are you saying they should just wait for Labour's long-term vision while they struggle to pay rent and keep the lights on?" The studio went silent. Even co-host Ed Balls, himself a former Labour MP, looked caught between admiration and sympathy. Viewers flooded social media within seconds. "Susanna Reid is doing what journalists should do, holding power to account," one wrote on X, formerly Twitter. Another added, "She's torn him to shreds. Starmer's team must be sweating right now." As the interview went on, the minister's confidence unraveled further. He tried to defend Starmer's recent speech, in which the Labour leader promised a decade of renewal, a phrase that had already been mocked online for its vagueness. "Renewal," Reid repeated, her tone icy but calm. "You've been in opposition for 14 years. People want answers, not slogans. Can you tell our viewers, in plain English, what renewal actually means? The minister blinked rapidly. Well, Susanna, renewal means... It means what? She pressed, cutting him off. More working groups? More committees? Because from what we're hearing, people in Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, they feel forgotten. They say Starmer talks about fairness but acts like a technocrat. Is that renewal? He stammered through a response about balancing aspiration and responsibility, but the damage was done. Reid's relentless line of questioning had cornered him, and the nation could see it. At one point, Ed Balls attempted to mediate, perhaps sensing the growing discomfort. To be fair, he said cautiously, Labour's polling is still ahead of the Conservatives, isn't it? Reid turned to him, her expression sharp. Yes, Ed, but being ahead doesn't mean being trusted. There's a difference. And that's what this minister hasn't explained. The studio audience, usually silent, gave a faint murmur of approval. By the halfway mark, the interview had become less of a discussion and more of a dissection. Every defense, every polished line the minister had rehearsed seemed to crumble under Susanna's scrutiny. When he tried to deflect by bringing up the previous Conservative government, she immediately countered. Blaming the Tories is not an answer. You've had years to prepare. What is Labour's solution? Not a slogan, not a soundbite, but a real plan. That moment went viral within minutes. Clips were shared across TikTok and X, captioned Susanna versus Labour, KO in 3 minutes. Behind the scenes, sources close to the production claimed the interview had been expected to be robust but routine. No one anticipated the political firestorm it would unleash. Even after the segment ended, the fallout continued. Viewers accused the minister of being clueless, robotic, and terrified of honesty. One user wrote, "If this is Labour's best defense of Starmer, the party's in trouble." Another commented, "Susanna Reid just said what millions of working Brits are thinking." Meanwhile, Labour insiders were reportedly fuming. A senior source told one political outlet that the minister had been hung out to dry by party HQ. He was given talking points that didn't match the public mood, the source said. Susanna smelled weakness and went for it. And who can blame her? Within hours, clips of the confrontation were dominating online headlines. Susanna Reid tears into Labour over broken promises. Starmer ally left speechless on live TV. Good Morning Britain meltdown. Reid demands real answers. The minister himself, leaving the studio later that morning, looked shell-shocked. Reporters outside asked if he regretted the appearance. He muttered, "We'll keep talking to the public," before hurrying into a waiting car. Inside the Labour Party, the timing couldn't have been worse. Starmer had just returned from a conference meant to project unity and strength. Instead, the GMB Showdown reignited doubts about his leadership style. Cautious, managerial, and seemingly disconnected from the passion that once defined Labour's identity. Political analysts piled in. Veteran commentator Andrew Pearce called the interview a total car crash for Labour. Meanwhile, another pundit on GB News quipped, Susanna Reid has done more damage to Starmer's image in 10 minutes than the Tories managed in 10 months. But not everyone saw it as a disaster. Some Labour supporters argued that being challenged so fiercely might actually help the party reconnect. Susanna Reid did Labour a favour, one grassroots activist posted. Maybe now they'll realize they can't hide behind spin. People want heart, not PR. The final blow came when Reid wrapped up the interview with her trademark composure. Smiling politely, she thanked the minister for his time before adding, "I hope next time you can give us clearer answers, because the public deserves them." It was polite. It was professional. But it landed like a punch. By the end of the show, the hashtag Susanna Reid was trending at #1. Clips were replayed on Sky News, BBC Radio 4, and countless social feeds. Even Piers Morgan chimed in from his Talk TV perch, tweeting, "Classic Reid. Calm, forensic, lethal." The episode cemented Susanna's status as one of Britain's toughest interviewers, someone who could cut through spin with surgical precision. And for Labour, it was another reminder that despite high hopes and steady polling, the battle for trust is far from won. As the credits rolled, social media continued to buzz. One viewer summed up the mood perfectly. Susanna Reid didn't just interview that minister, she dismantled him. And in doing so, She showed the whole country what real journalism looks like. The morning after, the political world was still reeling. Labour HQ scrambled to contain the fallout, Starmer's team drafted statements about clarifying the message, and party loyalists tried to defend the indefensible. But the damage was already done. In 10 unforgettable minutes, Susanna Reid had turned a routine interview into a defining political moment. One that exposed not just a minister's unpreparedness, but a party's fragile grip on credibility.